should be completely independent. Therefore, there should be no problem running them simultaneously. And I'm actually going to configure it so nCrunch will automatically look at my code and work out which tests need to be run given on what I just changed. And the option for that is only automatically run impacted tests. And I actually want my test to run straight away, so I'm going to say let my test run. And there we go. I'm going to maximize my nCrunch tests window, stick it in my main window. And look, without me touching anything, I literally didn't touch anything to run that test. Look, my test successfully failed. The expected value was true, and the actual value was false. And look again, this is amazing. This red X means this is the line on which the test failed. If we look here, this is where the test started. Later on, when we've actually got some code to test, you'll see that we're getting similar indications over test coverage on the actual code. Now, the other wonderful thing about nCrunch is if I change my code, I want you to watch what happens as I type the word true. I promise you I'm not compiling this project explicitly or anything. There we go, I have passing tests. I didn't need to compile. nCrunch watches my code. It keeps on trying to compile it in a secret place separately from my main compilation. And when the compilation succeeds, it automatically runs impacted tests if you have run impacted tests turned on. I think that's well worth a few $100s. So now I'm going to move the nCrunch test window over here, just so we can kind of keep an eye on it. And I'm going to close my Solution Explorer just for now. In fact, I'm just going to unpin it. So we can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. And I'm not showing passing tests at the moment, so let's just show passing tests. There we go. It looks, by the way, like our main bot program failed to build, so let's just see what's going on with that. And it's just a naming issue. So just to get that round that for now, I'm going to reopen my Solution Explorer, and I'm just going to rename our main function. So that build error has now disappeared from our nCrunch test window. It's not a thing we're actually testing at the moment. We might as well tidy that up now. So let's now go ahead and write some real tests. Remember, we're working on the parser, and I'm going to be slightly naughty and skip ahead to the happy path. Normally when I'm writing unit tests, I try and write a bunch of tests for failing paths like empty inputs and that kind of thing. We will return to that, but there's some stuff I want to get through before we go. So I'm going to say valid text, the parser parses the text into sender ticker from and to. By the way, commas are absolutely fine in these names, again, providing you've got the double back quotes around the name. And let's extend this a bit. Let's define the text. This is the text of the incoming tweet that the person who's using your bot sends. So let's think of what they might send. They're going to send the name of the bot, just so the bot sees that. My bot is called Stock Chart Bot, but of course you'll need to grab yourself a separate Twitter account and give it an appropriate name because you can't have mine. So the incoming tweet's going to look like this. It's going to have some kind of ticker symbol. I'll use LinkedIn's. It's going to have a start date. It's going to have an end date. And to keep things simple, I'm going to go for the US ordering of dates. So that's the incoming text. What do we expect from that? Well, we expect some kind of record. So we're going to have curly brackets. And we're going to need a sender. And that's going to have to be this if we parsed it correctly. We're going to need a symbol. Let's call that ticker. That needs to be whatever came in there. This is going to have to be a date time. And that pretty much defines what we're expecting. Now, of course, I'm getting an error here because we never defined what this record was. So this is our cue really to go away and write that. So I'll save that. Now you see we're getting an error here because fairly obviously we haven't defined that record. We're trying to create an instance of something we haven't defined. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab that code, go to my parser. As always, get rid of everything that they scaffold for you. Make a module called Stock Chart Bot parser and paste that code. It's for reference really. We're going to make a type that's called query. It's going to have a field that's a string, a ticker that's a string, from that's a system.datetime. So let's open the system namespace until it's the date time. Oh, and I missed out an equals here. And I forgot to edit those to colons. And there we have our record type. So let's go ahead and save that. Go back and see what impacts that's had on our tests. It looks like we're going to have to go back and recompile, and that's because Parser and Parser Test are separate projects. So Visual Studio is not quite clever enough to rebuild everything. Let's go ahead and do that now. Still got an error. Of course, that's because we haven't opened the stock chart bot namespace. And in fact, we hid that away in something called Parser, didn't we? So let's add that to the open. And we'll need in our Solution Explorer to make sure our tests have a reference to the thing they're testing. So here in References, add reference to something that's a project, and it's the Parser project. Fine, and now we're compiling. So we can get rid of that line now because we haven't expected. Well, what's our actual? It's going to be something like parse text. But of course we haven't got a parse function, so we better go ahead and make that. Back in Parser, let parse, and we might as well call the parameter text. So text is a string. And what's that going to return? Well, it needs to return an instance of query. So let's just do a failing test by returning some trivial stuff from there. So once again, I'm going to copy that code there and just return empty strings, just so we've got a compiling but failing test. Datetime.min value is quite a good one to use for failing tests. Look, we've got a failing test here. By the way, you'll sometimes find that Visual Studio's editor compilation lags somewhat. So although we're getting a syntax error there, or an error there because it's saying value or constructor parse is not allowed, we know this code is compilable because NCrunch compiled it and ran a test. So you can safely just ignore that. What's the error? Well, you'd expect an error, wouldn't you? Because we aren't actually parsing the data. Let's have a look. Yeah. We don't get the values, but we do get something that says the types are the same, but clearly the values are different, otherwise the test would pass. I'm going to go ahead and close the main function there, main file. So let's see what we can do to get this test passing. I'm just going to cheat, and I'm going to copy across the text that we're sending in as the test, and just put it in a comment here. So what do we need to do to get this test to pass? Well, the sender basically needs to be the first element from the incoming string when you split the string up by space. So how about we say text.split on spaces. Okay, I'm going to hover over elements, and that's an array of strings, which is what you'd hope for. And in this case, the first element will be stock chart bot, second will be LinkedIn, and so forth. Right, so very naively, we could say sender is elements 0. And that seems to compile. By the way, something that catches a lot of people out, for array indexing, you need to say dot and then the brackets for the index into the array. That's very annoying. If you don't do that, you'll get an error. It's something you eventually get used to. We can carry on being quite naive because if it's a valid incoming text, then you can guarantee that the tick will be the second thing. So we can go ahead and do that. Now, if I was being super strict, by the way, in my unit testing, I would probably test these things as individual tests. We can kind of be a little bit naughty and just put a breakpoint on the code at the point before we do the assertion. And we can click on the test here and say debug selected test. And that will give us a chance to have a look at what the values are. So what's in actual? Well, it's looking pretty good, actually. Sender is exactly what we wanted. LinkedIn, the ticker is exactly what we wanted. But the from and until are silly date values because that's not an implemented thing yet. But we're getting along quite nicely. So what are we going to do to parse those dates? Well, let's just declare ourselves a little function in our parser. If you want a function to be private, which this one will be, we'll just say let private parse date. It's going to take some string. We can just call it s. And I happen to know that there's a parse exact function in the datetime library. And we said we're going to keep things simple by adopting what us Europeans think of as the US style of date. So that's month, day, year. an invariant culture. And to get at culture info, I'm going to need to open globalization. And then we also need to do a date time styles. Assume universal. Really, time is not something we need to worry about for this anyway. So now we've got a date parsing function. And by the way, if you want to quickly try that out, you can simply send it to F# Interactive. We'd have to send our opens there as well. And you can try it out. We might want to make it not private for now, otherwise we're going to confuse ourselves. So 112000 works fine. Remember I said we didn't need to worry about date time. Well, in fact, we have got some offsetting going on because of the UTC. So let's try assume local. There we go. Right, so that should mean we can take elements 2 and send it into, that seems to compile. Now watch the tests on the right, passing tests. Now, if you're an experienced programmer, you'll be yelling at the screen now because, of course, I haven't done anything to make sure that we actually got 4 elements in that array. So if we send in things that don't parse into 4 elements, we're definitely going to have errors. But we're going to cover that in more tests. Okay, so we can go ahead and delete that comment. We need to do a bit of refactoring already. Because this test is a bit specific, it only really works for one string. In theory, I could have hardwired the values for these and simply returned those exact dates, and that test would have passed. And in a very strict TDD view of the world, that's what I would have done. So let's assume that I'm being a bit strict and I'm going to send some other values through. We're going to need to do some refactoring. Let's exploit NUnit's way of producing test cases, which is with the test fixture attribute, and we can move that whole string to there, which means this will need to take one argument, and I'll call that argument text, which means I don't need that assignment because we've already got a value for text. And if I pause for a moment, that test should still pass, which it does. Okay, so what happens then if we add another test for a slightly different set of inputs? I just need to copy that attribute, and let's say we change, or at least perm something here. Now that fails, and of course the reason it fails is because we've got our sender hardwired. So this is telling us that we need to refactor our test a bit. We need to refactor it by sending in the expected values as part of the test data. So the expected value there is a stock chart bot, and the expected value there is another bot, and we need another value here, or another item here, to accept that value from the test fixture attribute. So now our expected here is sender. I'm just going to slightly increase the size of my test window just so you can see what's going on. Yeah, we've got passing tests again. So just to reiterate what's going on here, we added additional data items to our test fixture attributes. We plumbed those through in the argument list of the type constructor, and then we just made sure we constructed our expected value using that. So that's meant we've got a bit more coverage on the sender. Let's try another case for the ticker to make sure we're not hardwiring the ticker. Let's make that stock chart bot again. Let's make the ticker Microsoft. Nothing else needs to change. And of course we've got a failing test again because we hardwired the ticker in the test. And the expected there is LNKD. The expected there is also LNKD. And the expected there is this different one of MSFT. Plumb it through. And by the time I've resized that window again, we should have a passing test, which we don't. So let's do a bit of debugging. Oh, we've still got a breakpoint there, so we can simply debug that test. Have a look at what actual is going on there. The actual is MSFT, so that would seem reasonable. You can see what I've done. I simply misdefined our test somewhat, so we need to let that test continue. Go back and fix the test. There we go, we're all green again. Panic over. Now finally we need to check our dates. I'm going to close my test window so I've got as much room as possible. And the trouble with this test fixture attribute is it only takes very simple types like strings and integers and things. We really want to send through some dates, so we're going to have to break those dates up into year, month, day. So I'm going to say my expected year, month, day, let's say from month, from day, from year, to month, to day, to year is going to be the pattern. We'll add those as constructor arguments to the test. That is going to be 1/1/2000. That is going to be 12/31/2015. Just to save me some editing, I'm going to comment out those two tests there. And we need to change those to from year, from month, from day, to year, to month, to day. Yep, and our tests are passing nicely, so it's a similar story with the other guys. I'll uncomment those. And just to get some coverage, I'll make sure that I've changed a day here. And I'll make sure that I've changed a month here. So let's make that the 31st of May. So there we go. We didn't have to explicitly run anything, but our tests all run. You'll notice, by the way, that Visual Studio still hasn't caught up and it's still saying that that's an error. Let's just do an explicit build here and see if we can clear that off. Yep, that's now finally gone. So now we need to go ahead and worry about what happens if we get various invalid forms of input, because that's going to happen particularly in an open environment like Twitter. So let's kick off. Let's just cheat a little bit and copy some of the boilerplate from our tests. And we're going to say given some invalid texts, I'm going to take out those. I'm going to copy the test fixture stuff. And I suppose the most trivial form of invalid input is just an empty string, leaving aside nulls for now. And I'm going to go back to my silly test now of comparing false to false. And then the real question becomes, what in fact should we do there? What should the parser return? Should we say the parser returns an exception or the parser returns empty stuff? Neither of those seem particularly satisfactory. So we're going to really explicitly model what can potentially happen there. And I'm going to just put that modeling in the test code for now. I'm going to declare a new type, and I'm going to call the type for the moment outcome. And what we're really saying is that our function can succeed or fail. So it could be success or it could be failure. And if you think back to the first module of this course, you'll remember that this is a discriminated union and the two cases of the union are success or failure. If it's a success, then success is going to have some payload that's the successful return value of the function. So we could say success of, and I'm going to cheat and just put, say, s, which is a string. And we could say that failure is just some message we might want to pass on to the rest of the system. Okay, so that's a way of modeling the outcome of a parsing operation, or actually any other operation which might fail. Let's take that a bit further, because of course this is hardwired to return a string for success, but what we really want is a query, because that's what these tests work in terms of. In other words, an instance of this record type here. So what we could say is that success returns a Q, which is a query. And I'm just going to do a go to definition for that, just to prove that that is indeed our record type, which it is. I did a go to definition here. But again, that's not very satisfactory, because that is hardwired to the particular type of outcome. We kind of want something that's generic across all the operations which might succeed or might fail. That's actually amazingly easy. We use generics. We say we parameterize this type for some success type of S, and we say that result is of that type. And now we've got a completely generic thing, at least as far as the success path is concerned, that can describe the result type of a function which might succeed or might fail. So what's the expected of some invalid text? Well, the expected is an outcome.failure, and let's for the moment just hardwire the error message in the test. We're going to clearly need to call parse to do this test. So let's say parse text. And let's have a little look at the types here. So expected is an outcome of some type that the compiler doesn't know about yet. An actual is a query, so we're not going to have very good results when we're comparing, we're trying to do an R equal on an outcome and a query. So we really need to make sure that our parse thing actually returns an outcome. So let's move that text to there. And let us make sure that the return type, let's say, let result equals, and then just assign that record. And now we're going to return a outcome.success of result. We haven't done the exception unhappy path yet, but at least that makes the type of parse be an outcome of type query. Trouble is, of course, that this will have broken our first test, and indeed you can see red all over the place here, because expected is a query. If I rebuild, an actual is an outcome of query. So expected is a query, actual is an outcome of query. So all we need to do actually is say, to keep the syntax simple, we'll use piping, and we're going to say outcome.success. Got a green test there, but we've got bad things happening here. I'm just going to force that test to rerun. And the reason we've got black blobs here and a red X here is because we had an exception before we even got to the assertion. And if we hover over here, system index out of range exception. Do you remember when I said that a program will be shouting at the screen because we're accessing elements of an array that I can't be sure is of sufficient length? That is why. And look, we've got red X here, so that's indicating exactly where the exception happened. So I can easily handle that. I can say match elements with, remember we're using pattern matching here, and we're going to say maybe the array has the right number of elements, which are sender, ticker, from, and until. And in that case, and I did the thing I warned you about of using commas rather than semicolons as my separators, we can go ahead and put sender in there, ticker in there, from here, and until here. We don't really need that intermediate bind. We can simply say, pass that forward with a forward pipe. So we'll only go down this branch of the code if we get a 4-element array from the split. And then we need to handle something where that isn't the case. And we need a catch-all pattern, which is just underscore, and we can return outcome.failure. I can't remember exactly how we phrased it, but we'll say invalid text. We'll just bring back our tests window and see where we are. You can double-click on a test in tests. I forgot to put a decent name in for that test. So, and by the way, notice we're passing again here. So let's have a little look about what's failing. If we hover over here, it's an outcome of type A, so it's not succeeded in resolving the exact type of expected. We can actually force that. We can say that is a outcome of query. And then we've got a parsing test. Now, what we'd also need to do is make sure that we successfully parse the dates. And if we couldn't parse the dates, we need to return an explicit failure there. I'm going to be slightly lazy about that and simply say try with, and we probably really want to be a bit more explicit about what's gone wrong there. So I'm just going to put a quick to do, and let's add some test cases for that. I probably should have done the test cases first, but there we go. So let's say those aren't dates. Let's see if we successfully return failure for those, and we do. And you can kind of see that we might want to add some more test cases here just to make sure we'd exercised all the paths. By the way, though, you can see here, this tells you which paths you've exercised. If there's a green blob on a line of code, it means that at least you've been through that line of code in your tests. Let's just prove that by commenting out those tests. And you can see there's no coverage for that branch.